Well, hey there, idiots. Welcome back to Observe. In today's video, we're going to be analyzing the nonverbal communication of Jared or Drake Bell in regards to allegations towards him from an essay victim. More on that in just a moment. Let's go ahead and roll the intro. So I want to offer a trigger warning to anybody who is watching this. It can be hard to hear some of the things that will be stated here. My goal in this is to be able to analyze Jared's nonverbal communication or Drake's nonverbal communication throughout this to be able to hopefully get an idea as to what his mental state is. Now, due to the brevity of this, due to the limitations of watching one court hearing, this will not be to fully determine whether or not he is guilty or innocent. This is going to be largely based as to just what his psychological state is, and then we can form some of an opinion based off of processing from that. But this is not going to be used for any form of court evidence on any level, as any of my videos ever are. They're meant for information and education purposes, not for legal or professional evidence. I think that's enough disclaimers for this. Let's go ahead and dive into the actual video itself.
I chose to write this statement because I want justice to be served more than anything. Aside from Cleveland.
Okay, I want to be able to make note of just what's going to be going on in this video. So right now, the essay victim is giving her testimony, and I have not shown her face, not only for her own privacy, but also because this video is focused on Drake's behavior and his nonverbal patterns. So what the goal is in this is to be able to watch to see what he does mentally while she's speaking on certain aspects. And judging off of that, hopefully we'll be able to have an idea as to what he's feeling in regards to that, and that could help us figure out whether or not he's guilty or innocent in the situation. So I just wanted to make note of that. He's not going to speak for most of this video. It will be largely just us observing him in relation to what she says, and then he addresses things at the very, very end. I'm going to maintain as unbiased an approach as I possibly can in this, but at the very end, I will share more of my opinions on this. So let's go ahead and continue forward.
The only other time that the defendant said me was in October of 2017.
So right now, a few things that pop up in his pattern, non-verbally in general, is that he now has this lopsided look on his face to where there's more action on one half of his mouth specifically than the other half. Now, I went and looked at other footage of Drake to be able to get an idea. Is this a pattern that shows up regularly? And from what I can see, he does have a largely symmetrical expression on his face or most of the time. And then it's not until she starts speaking that this lopsided expression comes out. Now, with that, considering that context, that would push me towards him feeling a level of contempt, which would qualify this half smile expression that he has on the lower half of his face. Along with that, you can see that he's narrowing his eyes, lowering his eyebrows, and drawing them together. This is in disdain or confusion or a combination of both. Now, those two emotional states, the contempt and then possibly disdain above, or scorn perhaps would be another way to say it, are not desynchronized. Those can oftentimes go hand in hand. So those are things that we're making note of so far. I'll talk to you more about how all of this plays in later on. Let's continue.
It happened in Illinois in the middle of the night. He digitally put me in the back seat of my aunt's car while she was driving him to a friend's house. The Illinois police only agreed to move.
So we're seeing a desynchronized expression of shock or surprise. Now, shock and surprise are characterized by a number of different movements across the face, not the least of which would be the light widening of the eyes, the raising of the eyebrows, and the dropping of the lower jaw. He has most of those going, with the eyebrows going upwards and the jaw dropping down, but you can see that his eyes are maintaining this squinted expression. Now, this could be seen as suspicion or confusion, but it's not total surprise, meaning that we can't lend full weight to his shock during this time, which is simply just a red flag for us to pay attention to. Is he fully surprised by this? Is he taken aback by this? We can't really say. It doesn't seem as though he's fully surprised by this, though. He's trying to act overtly confused. That will come up again and again. Let's continue.
Forward with that case if the Ohio police did not pursue this case. I don't understand why. Regardless of their reasons why, he has gotten away with me in Illinois. So
Interesting. Very tiny micro movement. Yes. When she's saying he has gotten away with, and then continues on from there, but you can see him nod ever so slightly, and it's a very small one. Even on the screen itself, it kind of just comes across as a shifting of the pixels, because this isn't the highest resolution, it's a Zoom call, so boy, the joys of that. But with that teeny tiny micro movement, yes, during her saying that he had gotten away with, that would indicate towards me that he does believe that he has possibly gotten away with something. The question is what? Well, in this case, I do believe it's the allegations that are pointed towards him. But we don't know that for sure. All that we see is that he had a synchronized micro movement, yes, with him getting away with something. So that's something to keep in mind as we continue forward, and let's do just that.
today, I will be discussing the details of the crimes that he has pleaded guilty to and the impact that they have had on me. This portion of my statement explains how he started grooming me when I was 12.
I also want to point out that this is extremely condensed down. I went through to be able to find the emotive states that he has that were anomalies compared to other areas. His normal resting face throughout most of this is characterized by contempt and scorn. Those are the two resting emotional states on his face throughout the entirety of this. With that in mind, I wanted to find areas where there were spikes from that, and then we could talk about how all of this plays together at the very end to help us have clarity as to what's going on here. But it is something that I wanted to make note of. It is condensed down. There is much more to this. If you want to be able to watch the whole thing and hear the entire thing and see her and really dive into this case, there are other videos on the internet to be able to do that. This one's focusing on his nonverbal communication.
12 years old. I started off as a fan of him. I was definitely one of his biggest fans. Everyone who knew me as a child knew that he was a hero to me. I would have done anything for him. From the time I was 12 to 15, my aunt.
So I want to point out some things. You can hear in her voice, which like I said, I'm not showing her face during these times, her nonverbal communication seemed largely synchronized. This is also a written statement as even pointed out by her, so that does add a little bit of complexity to an emotional read on her side. But I'm not reading her emotions during this point, but you can hear the emotion in her voice, and it was synchronized at this point. But on his side, what's interesting to me is that there is no reflection of it. There's no mirroring. For many people, when hearing recollection of traumatic events, it's common for us to be able to empathize and sympathize with those people. And this is due to mirror neurons, our own intellectual states, and kind of what makes us human, the ability to empathize. We're not seeing any of that on Drake in this point. She is speaking of traumatic events, and he is not sympathizing with her. He is still characterized by scorn, confusion, and contempt. And those are not good attributes to be showing while listening to somebody speak of something like this. But we'll talk more about that in a bit.
It took me to meet him and spend time with him many times. After I met him for the first time, he started speaking to me more frequently online. I confided in him about very personal things about myself, including my struggle with my mental health. I went to him for advice and for someone to lean on, and he gave me that. I felt protected and loved by him. When I was 13.
So what we're seeing here is a display from Drake. I'm going to refer to him as Jared because it's his appropriate actual name. So what we're seeing here from Jared is that he is doing a display of confusion at any single instance that she has given. There have been no areas in her narrative that have, from his emotional response, been true, according to him. This isn't what is actually true or what's not. According to him, he's trying to show that everything that she has said is completely false by outraged expressions of, oh, this is so confusing to me. This is absurd. I have so much contempt for this. I am so much above this. See, this isn't even affecting me emotionally. And it's this overt compensation that is a red flag to me, and that there is no credibility to her side from his point of view. He's saying that everything that she's saying is completely false, and he's more or less perfect, which we know is not the case because he's even pleading to not being perfect in this. But this overcompensation that he's showing with his nonverbal communication is begging the question of why is he trying to show that everything is false? It is a red flag. We are keeping track of it. Let's continue forward.
And I went to him for boy advice. He told me that I was beautiful and that boys were stupid. He then sent me a photo of myself that he had screen capped from my Instagram, telling me that I was, quote, such a cutie. I took and uploaded that photo online a year earlier when I was 12 years old.
So during this time, again, all that he has characterized in his face, you can see small amounts of action here in the corners of his nose, which is an indicator of disgust. The eyebrows are still maintaining the lowered and drawn together expression, which is common in anger, scorn, disdain, etc. And then his eyes are narrowed, which is common in suspicion or confusion. Regardless, what's interesting to me is that there is no reflection of her emotional state in this, which, like I said, seemed to be quite genuine from what I could tell from this small video. And I still have the question, why is he not emoting on any empathetic level to her? Unless, well, we'll talk about that later.
He saved that photo of me onto his phone. I didn't realize how disturbing that was until many years later. Another instance of creepy behavior happened when I was spending time with him at the age of 14. He told me that he couldn't believe how much I'd grown since he last saw me. He said that I wasn't little anymore, and I was, quote, a woman now. When I was 15, I noticed a huge shift regarding his treatment and attitude towards me. When I was younger, he was sweet and actually wanted to talk to me about my life. But at 15, he started sending me messages about how, quote, hot I was.
He's maintaining the same shocked expression this entire time. There are maybe some alterations in that he blinks or he moves forward and back, but this consistent emotional expression of shock could be seen as a red flag. As an expression lasts for a prolonged period of time, that means that it's forced to some extent, as emotional displays have a profile where they last for a short amount of time and then they fade away or they alter. So it's interesting that he has this prolonged pattern here. It does push me to believe that he might be forcing some of this shock and outrage, which does synchronize with everything else considering the context of everything. So that does make sense that he's trying to do that. I think that he still is forcing this emotion. Let's continue.
The summer of 2017, I messaged him, telling him that I was going to see him in concert in the following months. He replied by telling me that he couldn't wait to see me. He also asked me, quote, how old are you now? I told him 15. He then told me to, quote, hurry up. Don't smile at me.
So in this part where she's saying that he said to, quote, hurry up, he's saying to hurry up and age faster, which I believe is revealing of his psychological state towards her in general, that there's already something that he's pushing for at this age, which is not okay. And then the don't smile at me part, that's her directly communicating to him right now, because he has this expression of contempt and scorn on his face, and she's taking issue with it, understandably so. So that's what that means there, in case you were curious. I know that some people were confused by that in the context, but that's what's going on in that situation.
Not too long after that, his messages to me became blatantly sexual. This eventually led to many months of inappropriate messages and photos being exchanged.
So this is something that I have to work with here too. Since it's on Zoom, there's going to be a delay between the emotional responses to words that are being said. So I think we can kind of see that coming out here where she's saying that his messages grew increasingly inappropriate, and then there's a little delay before he does a substantial mouth blocking gesture that was not there before. He raises his eyebrows and then he folds his arms across him in front of him as well. Now, the folding of the arms doesn't mean that they're necessarily closing off. It doesn't mean anything unless it's considered in context. So in the context given, he has not folded his arms across him in any other area area except for here. It pops out here when she says that they were getting more inappropriate in their messaging, and then he does this entire cluster. And it's a defensive cluster, it's a blocking cluster. He not only blocks his mouth, but he also blocks himself off, and he has an eyebrow raise in there as well, looks away. All of this considered in context is not good news for him. He got extremely defensive, non-verbally, centered around this aspect. The question is why? We'll talk about that at the end, but it's an important question to ask.
Over Instagram and Snapchat. Back then, the last thing I wanted was to lose him. Not only because I was completely infatuated with him, but because I became scared of him.
Do you see, just from your own point of view, do you see a human being here who is sympathetic or is detached and maybe even finds it amusing? This is the question here. He has a fake smile, so it's not genuine joy, but it is a lopsided smile. If you cover up one half of his face, one half is very sullen, the other half is full-on smiling. This is contempt. And then along with that, he has the drawing together and pushing upwards of the eyebrows. And this is a patronizing expression, would be a way to put it. He feels so aloof and disconnected from her that it's almost outrageous. And the question is, again, if he is innocent, why is he not at all emoting to somebody who is recollecting something that they're obviously genuinely emotionally triggered by, and he is in no way responding to that? It's this odd, forced disconnect that's appearing that is more telling than what I think people are realizing. Let's continue.
There were times where I felt really uncomfortable talking to him in such graphic ways and wanted to be left alone. But I had a very hard time telling him that because I was terrified of upsetting him, so I would make excuses. He had me wrapped around his finger. This caused a tremendous amount of
little tiny micro movement there again. He had me wrapped around his finger, and you could see him do the teeny tiniest of nods in there. Now, is that conscious? Maybe it's impossible to say from just this video, but a decent-ish rule of thumb would be the smaller the movement, the less likely it is to be consciously controlled. So with this tiny of a nod in there, I do believe that this could be seen as nonverbal seepage in regards to what she's saying. She's saying that he had her wrapped around his finger. He could do whatever he wanted, and she was going to go along with it. And his little micro movement nod, yes, kind of affirms that. So he was in a position of power as an older man. She was a fan who adored him, and he knew it, just according to his body language here. Let's continue.
Stress and shame crimes that he committed against me in Cleveland. I want to make something very clear. The reason that these particular incidents did not result any further than oral sex was because the defendant knew that I was menstruating at the time. Had I not been menstruating then, he would have raped me. Don't look at me like that.
So he does flash a genuine expression of outrage, confusion. It happens very fast. You can see that emotional profile play across and how it's altered, and then he holds back into his shocked expression. There's something that did surprise him about what she stated there. I don't believe that in this context, considering what was given, that this is in relation to what he would say would be her lying. I think it's more so that he was surprised and disgusted that she would say those things out loud, bring it to public light, very private and very gross things that he had done. I'm fairly certain that he's surprised about that being said rather than of it being a lie. I hope that makes sense. We'll talk a little bit more a little bit later.
Because he would tell me how badly he wanted to, but use much more vulgar language. That night, the defendant took me backstage to be alone with him. He started kissing me, and the night ended in him having me perform on him twice. The next incident happened on December.
Interesting area with a more substantial head nod after her describing some very unsettling things, where he has a small nod in there as well. I don't know if this is an affirmation or if he would say it's something like, I'm trying to figure out a way to process for his side. for the sake of maintaining an unbiased representation of this, trying to understand what could be going on in their mind to justify both sides of this is important. So I'm really trying to figure out what he could be doing here to give everybody a fighting chance. And it doesn't make sense in context for it, besides he seems to be overplaying this outrage to what she's saying. Overplaying to a degree that almost undermines his credibility, I might add. But we'll talk more about some opinion stuff at the end, and we'll wrap it up after everything else is done.
2nd, 2017, while I was alone with him in his hotel room, he had talked to me about seeing me one last time before we all left Cleveland and went home. So we went to his hotel to say goodbye. In his hotel room, he started kissing me and had me perform on him again. My aunt was right outside the room waiting in the hallway while this was happening. She trusted him and never thought that he would ever do anything to hurt me. Eventually, he tried apologizing to me for, quote, breaking my...
Okay, so in this area, we can see that he's showing this forced and overt and prolonged absurd expression, that everything she's saying is totally absurd. And then it gets to a part to where she's saying, oh, well, while we were in the room, my aunt was outside of the room. And then in this part, he does nod, which means that somewhere he's lying, because he's nodding in affirmation to her, saying that her aunt is outside the room, but he's saying that everything else is absurd. And so now we have many questions that are popping up here. And why is he lying about certain aspects of it? And why is he showing these displays that are popping up again and again? We're not positive yet, but we are getting more of an idea as to what's going on here. Let's continue.
Heart, but deleted those messages quickly afterward. His crimes are not heartbreaking or whatever other loose term he uses. They are disgusting. He didn't care then, and he doesn't care now. That makes me feel worth.
This is interesting. So I believe from what I understand, he refers to what he did as heartbreaking. She says it's disgusting. And at that point, the smile of contempt that he has held steadily throughout this entire interview flashes a little bit higher, a little bit more pronounced. It's a spike from his baseline that he has. And then he has a micro movement no to say that he doesn't believe that it's disgusting. Well, he is admitting to a very minor level of this. He is pleading guilty to something that might get him a couple years in a cell, maybe, possibly, probably won't, but could. So if he's still admitting to something that has the potential to put him in jail, but then he's also saying with his nonverbal communication that he doesn't believe it to be disgusting, that raises other questions as well. We're beginning to understand what Jared's mindset is at this point. Let's continue.
The pain that the defendant has caused me is indescribable, and it worsens every day. Being used by somebody who meant the world to me has left me feeling more hurt than I've ever been before. I am now 19, and my life hasn't been the same since I was 15. I think about these crimes every single day. I feel like I'm in a constant dark place. Sometimes I wish I could disappear so I can forget about what happened. I have lost many nights of sleep because of this. I've lost count over how many times I fell asleep in class when I was in high school due to so many.
So what I'm watching, specifically what I'm watching for in Jared's face during this entire recollection that she's talking about, which is difficult to listen to, is any form of empathizing expressions, any form of sympathy for her, for the pain that she's obviously going through, and there's absolutely nothing. And what's interesting is that this part isn't talking about in relation to him so much even. It's talking about her experiences, how she is feeling. And even when it's talking exclusively about her experiences, he does not care. He could not care less. And that is revealing in and of itself. We're really getting an idea as to how Jared is functioning.
Sleepless nights. I also occasionally had to leave school early due to having panic attacks that were triggered by these incidents. During these panic attacks, I would struggle to breathe, sweat, shake, cry, and often faint. When I do sleep and do see him in my nightmares, it throws off my entire day. I'm sorry.
What you hear right now, and why I left this in, is as a person talks about a panic attack or an anxiety attack, especially in areas that could already be causing those sorts of emotions, it's more common to slide into one. And we can hear her having a very difficult time processing this part. But look at Jared's face right now. Do you see any level of sympathy for a very clear display of discomfort? No. The answer is no. He still does not care. For him, he's still maintaining this overt, detached, aloof, contempt-based expression. And it's telling. It's getting more and more telling, actually. Let's continue.
Back when I confronted him, he told me that he didn't want me to hate him. I don't hate him. I loathe him. He was calculating. He preyed on me and saved me. He is a monster and a danger to children. I am kindly asking you to send a powerful message that these crimes are never okay, no matter who a person is. I also want to bring up the letter that I wrote to you. In my letter, I explain why the defendant is not remorseful for his crimes. I described how he has publicly found humor in them and how he has used tactics to gain sympathy from the public. He could have easily.
Here's an interesting part. She's talking about how he's handled himself more or less on social media, and he's trying to show this outraged, absurd expression again. But now, this isn't a he said, she said sort of situation. There is physical evidence of him liking tweets that are making fun of the case. There is evidence of him going out to parties, getting tattoos, doing ridiculous things during this time that should be very somber and very serious. Especially like things like liking tweets, making fun of the case. That shows where he holds it as in a level of importance in his mind. He thinks that it's funny. And he's showing it here again and again and again that he thinks that this is amusing. Maybe mildly amusing, he's so far above it and he's detached. And it's incorrect. Jared, your body language right now is showing that you don't care. She's not lying right now, as shown by you. That's not good. Let's continue.
Ignored the people online who were mocking this case. Instead, he went out of his way to let them know that he thinks it's funny, and he can give me that look all he wants. He knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Fortunately, we do too. We know exactly what she's talking about. If you haven't watched any other videos on this, I do suggest you go and watch some other videos in context. There are more people who give backstories, talk about the social media sides, any other aspects of it. This one, since it's focusing on nonverbal, I won't cover it here. But I do suggest you go and watch, and then why she lashes out angrily at him does make sense in context. Yeah, this is a difficult one for me to go through. Let's continue.
The crimes that he committed against me are some kind of sick joke to him. My suffering is not for him to laugh at or his leverage to brag about becoming a good man now that he is a father. So today, if the defendant tries to tell you that he is remorseful, I am asking you to appreciate that actions speak louder than words. I deserved better than to be used for his sick desires and for my suffering to be used for his amusement. Jared Drake Bell is a pedophile, and that is his legacy. Thank you, Your Honor.
So that's her side of things. Like I said, extremely abridged. There was a lot more to it, more details, and more weight behind it. But characterized throughout that was a look of contempt and scorn from Jared, which lets us know that at a very base level, he had contempt and scorn for a person talking about a traumatic event, an event that at least was perceived as traumatic to them, and he had no emotional displays of sympathy or empathy with that. That's an enormous red flag in this sort of situation if he's innocent. If he's not, it makes a lot more sense. Now we're going to see his very, very brief response to all of this, and we'll talk about everything at the end.
Your Honor, I just want to say today that I accept this plea because my conduct was wrong.
He has a little shrug in there. I accept this plea because my conduct was wrong. And his pitch goes up and he shrugs a little bit. Now, the pitch could just be an inflection. People will inflect areas of their voice as they're speaking. There's not necessarily a reason behind that. And the little shrug would be I don't know, it was wrong. What it does make clear for us, though, is that he's not handling it with the weight appropriate behind it. Because even to what he's admitting to is disgusting. Like, even the small part that he's admitting to is disgusting. And I'll talk more and I'll give some more opinion at the end, but that is something that I'm making note of so far.
I'm sorry that the victim was harmed in any way, but that was obviously not my intention.
Interesting there. I'm sorry that the victim was harmed in any way. And it starts off with a large head movement, which could be the negative, I'm sorry, the negative emotion behind that causing that head movement. But it goes down to a micro level after that, which does seem to be more telling. And then he shrugs as if she was harmed in any way. Not by me, obviously, by somebody else. But it's odd that he has that desynchronization in his little teeny tiny part. He has 30 seconds of this entire thing, and there's already been 2 red flags in it. That's still not good news. Let's continue.
I have taken this matter very, very seriously. And again, I just want to apologize to her.
I don't think so. He said, I have taken this matter very, very seriously. Now, during that time, his pitch was gradually dropping off, which as a pitch drops off, there are a number of reasons that could be, and you have to look in the context of what it's given to be able to understand why. Dropping off of pitch could be an indicator of sadness. It could be an indicator of intense rage. It could be an indicator of somberness. Perhaps that's what he was going for here. It can also be an indicator that he doesn't believe what he's saying. So in the context, it's either the somberness or that he doesn't believe what he's saying. Now, considering the broader context of everything and how he emoted in relation to her traumatic recollection of what had gone on, I don't believe that he's trying to, or effectively believing in the somberness of things. He treated it like it was a pithy joke, and now he's trying to say that he wasn't. So he's counteracting his own nonverbal communication earlier, which, as we know, out of the two, it's much safer to believe what a person's body says rather than what their words say. Let's continue.
And anyone else who may have been affected by my actions.
And that was it. That was his statement. To everything that she said, he said, I don't know, I'm kind of sorry if you were hurt by that or anybody else that was hurt by my actions. And that was it. That's all that he saw fit to respond. Now, that was probably due to legal advice saying, don't say a lot of things, don't respond a lot, blah, blah, blah. But let's talk about the nonverbal communication side of this, and then I'll give you my opinions. Non-verbally speaking, I saw absolutely no empathetic mirroring from him on any level. All the way down to areas where she's talking about her own personal struggles, he made no effort to show that he cared. While she's talking about traumatic events, he made no effort to show that he cared. And then, immediately thereafter, when he had his 30 seconds to speak, he directly counteracted what much of his nonverbal communication said earlier. Along with that, during that time of speaking, we saw a couple red flags pop up in desynchronization points, verbal and vocal patterning, and nonverbal communication. So to sum everything up, if I had to give an opinion on this, I believe that he is guilty. I think that he did terrible things, and he has no intention on owning up to them. And at the very least, this is where I get frustrated. The victim, she appears young for her age in general. And right now she's 19, and she appears young. She could be mistaken for maybe a 15-year-old now. To imagine that then, this is years ago, she was 11 to 12 years old, anything could have remotely popped up in his mind to even hint at some sort of inappropriate behavior is disgusting. That is horrific. And to put it in perspective, he's 34 right now. 34-year-old adult man. That time ago, he would have been 27 years old. That's where I am. That's where many of us are watching this. And it makes me incredibly upset to think that somebody my age, with the ability to grow and live and progress, could look at somebody who looks so young, even for their age, at 19 years old, still looking so young, so you know she did not look 18 then. To even have something come in for inappropriate behavior is upsetting. At its very base, that's very, very upsetting. I do not like Jared on this. I'm very, very upset. My heart goes out to her. I think the only thing she was guilty of was idolizing a very, very terrible human being. And she was so young. Like, when you're young like that, that's what you do. You are so, everything's just dialed up to 1,000,000. You're so passionate about anything. My heart very much goes out to her. And I hope that as time goes on, she's able to heal and to try to move back to a semblance of feeling normal. And for so many people, that never happens. And the fact that he even opened the door for that to happen is unexcusable. It's just unexcusable. Jared. No. I don't know. Due to the nature of this video, I think we'll just wrap it up. I'm not going to play the outro or anything like that. Those are my opinions. I do believe that Jared got off with a much easier sentence than he should have. And this entire thing, this entire case, left me very exhausted. So, please do not try to reach out to anybody involved in this case or inflame it in any other way, especially for the victim. Try to give her her privacy. And if you do know her, just be kind. And that's it.